How's everybody doing today?
Yay!
How's everybody doing today? All right. We're about to get started, letting people settle down and get settled for a second, then we're going to go ahead and get started. I think we got a few people signing in, so we'll let them get settled before we get started.
Because I didn't get hired until
I mean, one thing. I read more, but I brought one thing. And I thought I would have it in front of me in case I needed to reference numbers.
But now that I'm hearing that I would have to redo it.
Yep.
And then it doesn't guarantee me enough extra support for
Yep.
fire.
It doesn't. It doesn't.
In fact, Tim even had me come and observe it and all kinds of things. Didn't do anything. It was all based on the interview. Somebody else interviewed that. So that's what I was told. That wasn't up to me. Because I would have supported Tim, for sure.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started today. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gregory Bosworth. I am the Dean for the Division of Humanities and Social Sciences here at St. Charles Community College, and today's Democracy Today panel will be on what's going on. What's going on? Initially, that panel was supposed to be me talking to you just in a one-man or one-person stand-up or sort of just my monologue to you about how I view what's going on in America today. And when I initially told Professor Coker about what my intentions were, we discussed this in April and May, and we said that, Michael said, Greg, this is probably going to change with everything that's going on in the country. And Michael was absolutely right, because what I initially had planned on doing, I felt that I would not squander an opportunity to educate my students, because that's what it's all about. It's about the educational process, the transferring of information from us to you. And that's why I invited my colleagues to help me with this journey with you, because I didn't want this to be focused more on a diatribe by a dean and a professor, but I want to get the academic expertise of my colleagues from their respective subject matter areas. And so what I'll do at this moment right now, before I go into my first initial point of this discussion, I would like to take a moment to let them introduce themselves, starting with Laura right here.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm in the psychology department.
Hi, I'm Dana Prewitt, and I teach sociology.
I'm Kate Weber, and I teach history.
I'm Dr. Nicole Nunn-Faron, and I am the chair of education.
Thank you guys for those introductions here. Initially, as I said before, I wanted this to be sort of a conversation when I spoke with Michael and others about what I was feeling at the time. And things have changed as we've gone through many different transformations over the summertime, from the inflationary hikes to the war in Ukraine to various other sociological, psychological, educational, historical aspects of what affects you in this country. I wanted to bring something to you that I think was needed. You know, speaking to my students and talking about current events in classes every day, each and every day, you know, I'm learning more about them. I'm learning more about the bigger community of St. Louis, the St. Louis area, the metro region. And I learned things that I did not know. I learned things about TikTok, Instagram, various other apps I shouldn't be using on my phone that are outdated according to some of you. So, and I want to take this opportunity right now to share with you some of my thoughts as to how I view things, or how things are viewed from a historian standpoint. And I won't go too deep into that, because that's why I have Kate Weber there to share from a historiological standpoint of how things are. But the purpose of this panel was for me to look and say, what can I do to sort of inform my students, inform my colleagues, inform the bigger community that we are here, that we are paying attention, and that we are on notice, okay? So what better thing to say is to ask that question of what's really going on? What's really going on in America right now? We're in the middle of a worldwide COVID-19 pandemic. We're on the throes of a recession. We could be on the cusp of a nuclear war in Ukraine or the world. We have civil unrest in America. We have an unprecedented search of a presidential home. There are so many things going on in America that we have to sit and ask ourselves that question, what's going on here, guys? What's going on here? And after the point of this presentation is for you to ask us, after each one of the panelists presents, or once we get done as a whole collective, what's going on? How can we help? What do we need to do? And that's what this is about. It's about what do we need to do so we can all get along, so we can all be better, and so we can all start this process of making America what it's supposed to be. And therefore, if we make America what it's supposed to be, therefore, as leaders, we can make the world what it could be. So without further ado, I want to go into my first question, and I think it's going to be for Kate Weber. With the events of January 6th and the unprecedented search of a former home of the president, how will historians look at these events in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? How they be remembered, how they be written? Kate, you want to answer that?
Yes. So this is kind of a complicated read because has anyone ever looked out at the horizon while they're going up a hill but not quite crested the top yet? Your visibility gets very poor before you crest a hill, and history is kind of like that. While we're still experiencing things as current events and we don't know how they're going to end up, it's a lot harder to make assessments of what the January 6th crisis is going to mean in the future, other than it was unprecedented and it was the first time something like this happened. Is it going to be the first in a string of events like this? Is it going to be like the Hitler's failed beer hall putsch that happened in Nazi Germany when the Nazis attempted to start something and it didn't succeed, and so many of them were sent to jail, and they spent time grumbling and licking their wounds for a few years before they could regroup and come back later. And that's a possibility. It kind of depends on what happens next. But it is unprecedented, and it's going to set new case law. Presidents have rarely faced legal consequences, in part because often presidents have followed precedents that have been set up before them and social norms that previous presidents have followed. We have very little case law regarding charging former presidents or sitting presidents with crimes. And I think this will provide us with a lot more information about whether or not a president or former president is above the law once we see more information about what comes out of the Mar-a-Lago search and what the Department of Justice does about it. But we're kind of in the middle of it right now. But it's definitely going to get remarked upon, much like Watergate gets all sorts of attention because that too was somewhat unprecedented.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. She's right. Watergate, as we've drawn so many parallels to Watergate and what's going on with January 6th and the things of that nature, because Watergate happened almost 50 years ago, and so now it's getting, we have the perspective of time on our side to look back at it to say, well, maybe it wasn't this bad, maybe it was meant for this, maybe it was meant for that. And so, as Kate said, it's kind of too early to tell, but it is troubling because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if there will be another attack. We just don't know at this point, will this be the end? But what we do know is that those things are a threat to our current democracy. We do know that. We understand that we cannot have Watergates, we cannot have January 6th, we cannot have those kind of things that go on to threaten how our current way of life is in America, because it's so fragile. It sits on a razor's edge as it is, and when you have things that blatantly shatter those norms, mores, and values of the American way of life, then I believe those are things that we just, we have to take very seriously, and we just don't know. As Kate said, there's not enough information out there yet. There's no case law. These things are unprecedented. We're in unparalleled times here, so we don't know. But what we can do is educate ourselves and hope these things doesn't happen in the future, so we can have a better way to sort of, well, I hope these things just don't happen. I don't want to have to explain this ever again, because I can't explain this in class. When students ask me, I have no answers. I can't look at something like Marbury versus Madison, 1803. I can't go to that because this has never happened before. And so there is no precedent to this. There is no case law. There is no history. There's nothing that preceded this. So I don't know how to teach this, to be honest with you. As a historian that's been teaching over 25 years, I can't teach this because I haven't seen this before. No one's seen this before, not in America, not here, not in this country. And so therefore, we just have to make sure that we stay vigilant, and we hold people accountable. If there are some crimes, we hold people accountable with the truth. And the truth is, we have to make sure we speak on this, we have to make sure that you're aware of this, and we have to make sure that the world knows, what we stand for here in this country. All right, let me get to the next question. And the question is for Laura. Do you think that there's a correlation between mass shootings and mental health?
It was a very complicated question to unpack. Like, it really is. If you think about the prevalence of mental health issues, like mental illness in the country, it's extensive. And how exactly do we break it off, right? We identify someone who commits a mass shooting, so as someone who is mentally ill. Like, it feels easy to identify them and say, that person must obviously be mentally ill. But the hard part is that when a lot of them, one, end up dying, so they usually either end up dying by suicide or officer-assisted suicide in the process, right? So getting to actively interview someone who has committed a mass shooting becomes exponentially more difficult, right? So we can go back and do kind of psychological research and talk to their families and talk to their friends and see what was leading up to it. But most people who experience isolation or loneliness or feel like they are being targeted or persecuted or that their world just isn't going right, like, most of us experience those feelings, and most of us do not go on shooting rampages, right? So when I was unpacking kind of the question of mass shootings and mental health, the thing that I actually ended up getting drawn to and what I kind of contemplated on is that most of you have spent most of your academic careers going through active shooter trainings. Like, that was a thing that I had to come to the realization of. I was in 8th grade when Columbine happened, right? I was in college when Virginia Tech happened. Like, these things unfolded while I was in these moments, right? But you guys, most of you, have gone through active shooter training probably almost most of your academic careers at this point. And what I was interested in is, what does that do to your mental health, right? And the stress of acknowledging how on edge you might be feeling at any given point in time can take its toll, right? Is mentally and physically exhausting. Because if you're sitting on edge constantly, wondering if there is going to be an active shooter, or can you find your exit? What is your exit strategy in this moment if something were to happen? Really can impair like long-term health, right? And can really cause some long-term illnesses, not just psychologically, but also physically, because the physical effects of stress, which is what that is, can be really detrimental, right? So, do active shooters have mental illness? Probably. Do most of us deal with probably some form of mental illness at some point in our lives? Yes. I'm more concerned about kind of this prevalence of health concerns for your generation, right? Like, what is this doing to you guys as a whole? And that is the thing that I think was most interesting, and I think needs a lot more research and a lot more like time to look into it, because we don't really know yet what the long-term effects are going to be on you, right? Like, we don't know, psychology doesn't know yet fully everything that's going to be happening, right? Or how this is going to turn out. So feeling on edge is probably pretty normal for you right now, and that's hard. Anything else you want me to address?
No. I'll just piggyback on that. What I try to do all the time is, and I think you guys may know this as well out in the audience, but I know my fellow colleagues on stage understand what I'm about to say. What I try to do in every situation is read the audience, read the room. You guys understand what I'm saying? I try to, whatever situation I go into, I want to be able to take the temperature down, so to speak. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Because that means a lot. In a classroom situation, in a meeting with faculty, staff, students, whatever, because you never know, as Laura said, what a person's going through. And at some point in all of our lives, we will deal with some form of mental illness. And I do believe, and I can't speak to this more so than Laura can as our psychologist here, but I do think that people sometimes they may break or suffer from a temporary break from reality. I don't know. I believe it happens. And so what I try to do is every situation I get into that I may deem stressful, that I feel a little apprehensive, what I try to do in that situation is I make sure that I try to lower the temperature. I don't add fuel to the fire, because you just never know. And it's not that you're walking around on eggshells or you're not being yourself. I think it's being courteous to respect other people, because you just never know. So I do agree. We just don't know. And we are in, as I said earlier, a few minutes ago, we are in really some unprecedented, unparalleled times, because these things are happening so regularly that it almost feels as if we've become numb to this as a society. And so, and that's not good. That's not good for any of us. Of what Laura just said, the long-term health effects, the long-term mental effects, we just don't know. I guess there hasn't been enough research done to really, to quantify how this will affect us as a group of Americans. We just don't know. But I do encourage you to, if you are experiencing any kind of mental troubles or anything of that nature, reach out to the appropriate counselor here on campus, reach out to those offices there and get the necessary help that you may need, because we all at some point, as Laura said, we all go through things. You know, I think I went through a bout of depression when my mother died. You know, it was temporary, but I went through that, and I understand what that means to be depressed when you lose something that you love so much. So I get that, I understand. So there's no shame in that. I wasn't ashamed, I'm not ashamed now. It happened. And I'm a grown man, and it happened. And so, as Laura said, more so, how does this affect you? How can we do to help you in that area there that you may need some help with? Okay? All right, I'm gonna go to Dana next. And the question is for Dana, and I think she has it right there. How has the country changed over the last decade? It's a kind of long question, I won't go through that, but I'm talking about the deaths of Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, the various protests and social, societal things that we may be on the verge of anarchy. Dana, how do we, from a sociological perspective, deal with that, in your opinion?
All right, so I think from a sociological perspective, and this is going to touch quite a bit on what Laura just mentioned about mental health. If I'm being honest, I feel like from a sociological perspective, it's kind of a good news, bad news situation, maybe a little heavy on the bad news, if I'm being honest. And so a couple things. So when we think about anarchy, there are some different ways that we can interpret that. If we're going to think about it in a very textbook sense, right, are we headed towards complete and utter lawlessness? If we think about anarchy in the sense that we often mean it, like, you know, just sort of chaos, unending chaos, or even if we mean anarchy from the perspective of anarchists who are committed to things like anti-capitalism, mutual aid, and anti-racism. No matter how we hash anarchy from a sociological perspective, it feels hard to definitively say that we are, for a couple of reasons. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those reasons feel like good reasons. More specifically, as sociologists, we tend towards this idea that systems stabilize themselves and that, you know, systems often have some form of tension in them, and that provides very small comfort, right? Because it may mean, based on conventional sociological wisdom, that no, it may not completely tip over, but does that also mean that we have to sort of live with it? And so to contemplate this question, I actually went to a lot of public opinion research. And even though public opinion research is not a perfect measure of where we are, it is somewhat of a barometer for what people are thinking. So when we think about contention among racial inequality and the visibility of issues like police brutality, that definitely brought things to people's attention. More people are aware. We are seeing shifts in terms of ideologies. A Gallup poll revealed that 6 out of 10 Americans see anti-Black racism as a problem. When it comes to specific types of racial inequality, police brutality was towards the top of the list. So there are definitely things that we know, but then we also have to ask, but what has actually changed, right? So we may be aware of it, but what does that mean? What are we doing with our awareness? And it kind of falls in the same line when we think about COVID with inflation. The January 6th insurrection, a public opinion poll revealed that about, I think it was 40% of people said that it was something, from a political poll, said that 40% of people saw it as something that was being like transformative or really impactful, compared to 52% for mass shootings, 62% for COVID, 66% for 9/11. In terms of COVID, our public opinion is, you know, rapidly changing along with the climate. And inflation, while we do see inflation as being a big problem, I think what the public opinion research has yielded is that we're kind of dealing with it, right? And that's what, you know, what I think is really important about Laura's comments is that on the one hand, while us sort of dealing with it may not mean mass anarchy, we also have to think about what does that mean for us today and now, and what does that mean for our collective well-being. Yeah. So anarchy, I don't know. I genuinely don't know what the answer to that will be long-term as a sociologist. Unfortunately, I cannot predict. But even with a perspective that that systems tend towards stability, that doesn't mean that everything that is within the system is always good for us all the time. And I think that those are good examples of things that are not particularly good for us, but that we are very much dealing with, however we're dealing with them.
It's a lot to unpack there, isn't it? I know some of my students out in the audience saying, yeah, I'm used to that now, because those are the kinds of questions that I gave. What I gave the panelists, those questions are, what I try to give my students. And the whole goal of this thing, me as an educator, is for anyone in my class, anyone in my sphere, is to critically think. Because you guys are going to have to solve these problems. You know that, right? These are going to be your problems. In the next 5 to 10 years, these will be your problems. Okay? You guys will inherit some of these things that we're dealing with right now. That doesn't mean we're going to leave you here or there, but these are going to be your problems. You guys are the future right here. And so you have to start critically thinking about some of these things. And it's never too early to do that. It's never too early to do that. And the question that I gave to Dana was packed with so many nuggets in there. I want to piggyback on something in the initial part of the question when I mentioned the deaths of Trayvon Martin and George Floyd and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. But let me stay closer to home here. And Dana, you can jump back in. I don't know if you were here at the time, or anybody on the panel that maybe was here, maybe Kate. Could you tell us? Can anyone share with us how the civil unrest in Ferguson sort of propelled things on a national level or local or regional level here? Briefly talk about the Mike Brown incident and what happened in Ferguson, how it paralleled to what was going on the national stage at the same time with all the other things that have been happening around the country from Florida to New York and elsewhere when it came to the deaths of unarmed black men.
So I'm just going to jump in to say that I am very much a transplant to St. Louis, so I was not here until 2019, but I am happy to chime back in after other folks have had a chance to sort of talk about my perspective as someone who's not from St. Louis.
Thank you, Dana.
Oh gosh, we are a deeply segregated city. We have a long history of segregation that is not necessarily put in by law, but is a consequence of old policies that supported the way we suburbanized and the way housing was funded through the government. And over time, that segregation has persisted, although it has moved into different neighborhoods, and Ferguson is one of those majority black areas that most of the government, when the Mike Brown incident occurred in Ferguson, was white, and much of the police force was white. And so there were already a lot of tensions. They were also found to be funding a lot of their local resources by pulling people over, giving tickets, purposefully encouraging quotas in order to make sure that you could find people enough to fund local governmental things. So this is not, Mike Brown's death is a particularly egregious example of bad systems in place and racism that is part of kind of the government systems in Ferguson. And I mean, oh gosh, I grew up, when I was in 7th grade or so, that was when Rodney Brown was assaulted and it was videotaped. So in some ways, some of the same issues are arising, and I think some of the biggest shifts are that we now have more technology to reveal that these things are happening. Although, interestingly, having more cameras has not moved the lines very much, which I think is fascinating, because even if you see what's going on, people still very much interpret it with their own lenses. I don't know what else to say, but Black Lives Matter protests were a key component in what was going on there. There's still some really interesting community building work going on there.
I think the media, too, exacerbated the situation with Mike Brown in a lot of ways that negatively impacted. I know you asked about like how it affected us here. I think the community was shocked. I mean, yes, we are a segregated city, no denying that. But I think that we never expected to have something like that happen in our own backyard. And I am a transplant from Ferguson, Florissant. That's where I'm from. So I definitely didn't expect that to happen in my own backyard. And I think that the media is so good about exacerbating negative situations, and a lot of times the community came together in Ferguson actually rather quickly. White, black, Asian, they all came together and wanted to solve this. The actual people who live there, and wanted, okay, let's get this police force turned over. Let's get new policies in place. It didn't happen as fast once it was brought to light as it could have or should have because of the media. And I think that media is great and technology is great and knowing about things is good, but in certain situations, I think it holds us back because the media should have at some point stepped out and said, let the people who live there do the work, because that's who wants to do the work, that's who it affects, and they didn't. And instead, what it did is it brought in so many outsiders that negatively impacted the good work that people in the community were trying to do.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Kate. Does anyone else have anything to add? Okay. When it happens in your own backyard, it's sort of jarring, you know. But it looks like right now where we are at SCC, we're trying to make those necessary strides to that show equity, inclusion, and acceptance. So I think we are on the road to making sure that we are an inclusive environment here. And so that's something to be applauded here of what the administration, the Board of Trustees is doing here. So, and I think we've all learned from those incidents around the country that we need to do more. There's still more needs to be done, you know, and that's why we're having these conversations. That's why I have conversations with my colleagues, because I don't know it all. I don't see it all. I need their perspective. I need the perspective of other people, of women, of men, of white people, black people, Asian, Hispanics. We need those perspectives because sometimes we don't always have the answers. But that's why these forums and things that Michael is putting on, sponsoring and doing are so important for us to have those dialogues to get together so we can come up with an equitable solution that benefits everyone involved. I saved the best for last, and it's a question regarding education, and because it affects you all, and it has affected you all. And so without further ado, my question is so long, I gave Nicole a lot to unpack there.
Yes,
So
you did.
I saved the best for last because I wanted you to hear this, because you will have children that's going to be in the system, the school systems. You'll have children that will be in college. Some of you may already have that. But I want you to hear from an educator who's been in the field of education for over 20 years, who can speak to the certain nuances and things of that nature. So I won't read a question, so I'm going to let Nicole Nunn-Faron, Dr. Nicole Nunn-Faron, jump right into it, and she'll take it from here. Go ahead, Nicole.
So, yes, Dr. Bosworth, I think he wanted me to go back to the beginning of time. And I told him, I said, our education system comes out of 16th century Prussia. So let me start there. Actually, that's not a joke. It is, but it's not. We are still following very much in K-12 an education system that was developed in 16th century Prussia. Just think about that. It was never for the good of the students, by the way, and it's all about the control. So what I did decide to do is go back as far as 2000. And in 2000, we had Goals 2000, and then we brought about No Child Left Behind, and then the No Child Left Behind revisions, and then ESSA which is the Education Act that was supposedly going to correct the No Child Left Behind, and it didn't. It's so funny, there all really are versions of this No Child Left Behind, but what did No Child Left Behind do? It left children behind. It was great in theory, However, No Child Left Behind was never properly funded, because in order to be properly funded, it would have had to have had about one teacher for every 3 kids in K-12 education. Yeah, we can't get one for 30 half the time. So that wasn't going to happen. So what did happen is that our governing body saw these acts as, oh, well, let's use them to make educators accountable. Well, how are we going to make educators accountable? Well, we're going to test our students up one side and down the other. So you have standardized testing. It used to be when I was in elementary school, we had standardized testing just like in the spring. That's cute. How many of you sat through quarterly benchmarks? And I mean, you're sitting through standardized testing like every 6 weeks now. There's no more of this just in the spring, because they say, well, we're gathering data. However, this has had the biggest negative impact on education, because what it has done is teachers are no longer given the opportunity to teach for the joy of teaching or for the students' love of learning. When I was in elementary school, I kid you not, there was a comment coming through, and I was very excited about this in 6th grade, and we weren't even studying this in science, but I can remember telling my teacher, Mr. Maxey, oh, let's start. We did a whole unit, because the teacher stopped the curriculum we were doing at the time, and let's look at what the kids are interested in, right? Really, let's build on that. There's great math and science and all of these wonderful aspects that you can use thematic units. That doesn't exist anymore. In today's school system, we have this thing called a curriculum guide, which the word guide means you're supposed to use it as a guide, not as the Quran, the Torah, the Bible. That's not it. It's not law. However, because of the accountability, the districts are so accountable to the state, and this is where the funding comes in. The state's accountable to the national level. Again, you're talking about funding. What has happened is these great bills that were great in theory but couldn't be put in practice were used as accountability. And so now there is no more individual identity in classrooms. There is no, oh, they're a great teacher because they let us do this and they let us study that. That doesn't happen. You can walk into any given classroom, whether it's a 2nd grade classroom or an AP history class. They're studying the same thing on the same day as the AP history class in the next building over, or the exact same thing in the same day. And it's even to the point now where it's done and presented in the same manner. I am not kidding you. There is no more teaching. Teachers are given scripts to read. This is what you have to say. This is the PowerPoint you have to use. This is the worksheet that your children have to do. By the way, worksheets have absolutely zero educational value to them. How many of you completed 1 million worksheets in K-12? How many of you remember anything from any of those worksheets? Exactly. Right. There's no educational value in a worksheet. So those should have been thrown out the window a long time ago. But instead, districts are purchasing these curriculum that literally it's a script. The teacher has to read it. They have to give a certain test. Everybody takes the same test, studies the same day, same thing on the same day. There is no more of an individuality. Another part of the question was, well, why aren't we seeing kids go into the teaching pathway? Why are we seeing a decrease in that? Because, okay, how many of you want to go into something you enjoy? Has school been fun sitting in K-12? No. The government has made sure we took the enjoyment out of it. When your teachers are forced to read a script and do a certain PowerPoint and do these certain worksheets, there is no more learning for the love of learning. So people don't want to go into something that wasn't fun. You want to enjoy the rest of your life. You don't want to be tortured, right? So that's where we're at with it. The other piece of this is, I hate to say it, guys, but in education, throughout our society, we see what's called the trickle-up effect, which means things that start in K-12 eventually go to higher ed. I will tell you, in higher ed, we are now starting to see all of the paperwork. Everybody has to have the same course objectives. Everybody needs to be studying the same thing on the same day. There's no longer academic freedom Just as it was taken away in K-12, it's now being taken away in higher ed. It's no longer study for the love of learning, take your kid's interest and run with it. We don't get to do that anymore. Things are given to us, and that's what we're told we have to follow now, and that's what's happening in K-12. So why aren't kids going into this? They're not enjoying it. They didn't enjoy coming through it. They don't want to go back to it. What I will tell you is what we also saw with all of these policies that were put in place over the last 20 years is that parents also lost respect for the field of education because, again, it was a trained dog could have taught this. I mean, literally, a trained monkey. It doesn't take any creativity to read a script, and so there was a lot of loss of respect. What I will tell you is I truly think COVID has done some good things for the world of education because it has opened parents' eyes to what is really going on in the schools, how much teachers' hands are tied today, how much standardized testing. I would bet you your parents did not know you were having to sit down and complete standardized testing every 9 weeks. I would bet you, because when they were in school, it happened just in the spring. But now it's every 9 weeks. And the thing of it is those standardized tests, they're not for the benefit of the students. And you know how I know that? Because the teachers aren't given the data from those standardized tests until it's way too late. So like the big spring test, the EOC exams, teachers don't get that data till they come back to school the next August. So they can make adjustments for that following year, but to make adjustments for you, that's not reality. They don't get the data back soon enough. Kind of the same thing. We're going through an accountability cycle here, an assessment cycle. And we can make adjustments for the next time we teach a course, but to make immediate adjustments, you have to have formative feedback. Formative feedback comes from formative assessments. Those are those quick discussions you have with your teachers, where your teachers are giving you open-ended questions and seeing what you know. Those don't happen as much anymore. But that's when the teachers make adjustments that day on what they're teaching. But again, it's not like that anymore. Now you have a script. Teachers are given a script to read and a PowerPoint to present, and it's just the academic freedom is gone. And I think that that's why we're seeing a mass exodus from the field of education. And so I do think that COVID is going to open the eyes of the legislators because it's opened our parents' eyes. And so I think that hopefully we will start seeing changes. The other piece of that is, I don't know if you guys know this, but Missouri, we just got number one. We just got number one for the lowest paid starting teacher salary in the nation out of 50. We are number one. We are the lowest paid, below Mississippi and Arkansas and every other state out there. So that's also a problem. There is not another profession that, I don't know if you know this either, but in the first 7 years of a K-12 teacher's academic career, they're expected to get their master's degree. There's not another profession out there that I know of that teachers are expected to have master's degrees and making $35,000 a year. So I think that we saw this happen with nursing in between about 2004, 2005. There was a big nursing shortage, and so hospitals had to start paying more. Doctors' offices had to start paying more. I think we're going to start seeing this on teacher salaries. I think that we may have a few things coming back our way. We may get higher salaries. We may get academic freedom back in the classroom as well. Because if you look at it, the data will show you that the implementation of all of these standardized tests and these scripted curriculum has not done anything for actual learning. As if anything, it's kind of rolled us backwards.
Okay. How many of you guys want to be teachers now? I still do. So I
do.
Thank you, Nicole. We do have some problems in education, there's no doubt about that. And Nicole touched on a lot of things that are not just a Missouri problem, but a nationwide problem. I got into teaching because, as I told my students in my class, I shared the story with them. I originally was not even into the field of teaching history. My first major when I got into college, I was a biomedical engineer. And I hate science, go figure, right? So, But I was inspired by one of those teachers that Nicole just talked about. I was inspired by a guy named H.P. Jones. He was a history professor, very creative, very energetic, very inspiring. And, you know, he talked to me and said, you shouldn't do that because you don't have an interest in it. I had an interest in history, and I just needed someone to mold that and shape that, and that's what we need in the classroom, and that's what I try to do in my class. And I think some of my colleagues, from observing some of them and speaking to them, they feel the same way too. And yes, we do have our problems in K through 12, and they manifest themselves here, you know, at an institutional level here, because it's what, you know, the K through 12 brings us here. And so we have to manage that out and retrain you guys on how to be students, how to be college, how to be successfully in college. So yes, you know, we have those things. It's a tough job, but it's a job that, as I look in the audience, I see the passion. Look right here, I see the passion. And I know that we have dedicated faculty members here at St. Charles Community College that has your best interest at heart. I know that for a fact because I've talked to many of them. You know, we've had the same kind of battles trying to get funding. Nicole knows this. Paul knows this. Dana, we're trying to get it. These people aren't talking about themselves. They're trying to do things that are going to enhance their programs to enhance you, to enhance the students that come after you. So it's a battle that we're all in it. Every last one of us, we're in it because we care. It's not that none of us are making a ton of money. Right, guys? Right, Paul? No, nobody's making a ton of money here. We're here because we love it, because we're making a difference.
And you got to remember, too, I think it's probably one of the only professions where you actually can see an immediate impact of your work. I got to tell you guys,
Absolutely.
there's nothing like explaining something to a student who has struggled with a concept and sitting down with them and then that finally that aha moment, and you know you have impacted the rest of their educational career, if not their life. There's nothing better. It gives me chills even talking about it. Those are the experiences, those connections with students. Those are the reason you do this.
Priceless.
Yeah.
Priceless.
And we are making strides. I'm not kidding, I think COVID is going to be good for education. I think because parents realized, you've probably heard some of your parents and some of you guys might have said, wow, this is what teachers have to do, and they have to do it every day. Yeah, they do. And so now parents are starting to see, and once you get that community support, it will have a trickle-up effect, and we'll start seeing it on the state legislative level as well as the national level, and I think we'll start getting more support, and hopefully we'll see less of that standardized testing and less of that script.
Well, guys, I just really want to right now thank you for attending, and I want to be able to open the floor up for questions. If you guys have any questions, Paul's right there. Can you guys go, if you have any questions or want to say anything, just go to Professor Rossler there.
There you go. Hello, thank you. What are some practical solutions that we can do as students or citizens or teachers and parents to improve the education system and like that whole mess?
It's a mess. It's a mess. I think your voice needs to be heard. Go to town hall meetings. Talk to your local legislators. You have a local representative at the state level. Let them know. I think a lot of times they are so far removed, and they remember they're my age. They're old or older, and they remember school, what it was like in the 80s and the early 90s when they were in school, and that's not what the classrooms are today. And I think that they're not always informed. I would love to switch jobs. Not really, but have them come in and be a teacher for a semester.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they couldn't do it. I'm not going to lie. They couldn't do it. They'd run crying after a few days. It takes a lot. But I think, talking to your local legislators, just making them aware of what's truly needed, having your parents get active in their schools, because the more active not just your parent, you're over 18, you can get active in those local schools too, volunteer. The more active that you are, the more you're gonna see, the more you're gonna wanna make those changes and implement those changes as well.
Yeah.
I'm not a parent, but I keep an eye on what my local school district is doing because I am a citizen and I want them to be teaching medically accurate sex education. I want them to be teaching historically accurate American history. And if this is something that you are, if there are issues that you are very concerned about, going to a school board meeting to help drown out the people who are a loud minority who are against something and get most of the attention. Paying attention to, there's a great website that's, I don't have the address memorized, but you can Google, that tracks what bills are moving through the Missouri State Legislature. And yes, you can randomly contact your senator or legislator, but if there is a specific bill that's being discussed, it's especially useful to reference that particular bill and say, hey, I really think that Bill XYZ is a bad decision for Missouri schools, and vote. Like you said, vote. You can research your school board representatives when they're running for school board and see what their positions are on a variety of different school issues.
And remember, how many of you guys have jobs? Your taxes are paying their salary, you should know what they stand for.
Any other
Anyone else?
questions? Yes. No?
Okay, well, you guys have been a great. Oh, okay, back again, okay.
What exactly was the No Child Left Behind thing? And
No Child Left Behind was a bill that came out, and it said a lot of different things, but what it said is that you really, as a teacher, you wanted to individualize instruction for each and every student and make sure that you were teaching for mastery. All of those things are a good idea, but the way it was worded literally would have cost more money than the education system has, because it would have taken like one teacher for every 3 students. Yeah. And in Missouri, I can remember this because, good Lord, I'm old, and Paul, you might remember this because, but there was a big thing when I was in like elementary school about gambling and the riverboat casinos and lotteries. This is pre-lottery, guys. We're talking about the 80s in Missouri, and how all of that money was going to go to education, right? It did. But guess what? They took all of the other money that used to fund education and they put it elsewhere. So that's all that funds education now.
Every time we've had an economic downturn, our state has taken funds away from higher education as well. And whenever the economy has recovered, we have not given it back.
Nope.
That's another issue that you can discuss with your legislators about putting some money towards higher education. That's one of the reasons why public tuition is a lot higher today than it was when your parents went to college.
Speaking of college, and this, I wrote a paper on this when I was doing my dissertation, actually. One thing that people don't realize is that in 2010, nationally, our laws were changed about student loans. And it used to be that you could get your own students could get their own student loans. 18, 19 years old, you could get your own student loans. After 2010, there's no more student loans for you. Parents, it's called a Parent Plus loan if you're looking for federal loans. And so what happens is if parents don't qualify, maybe they don't have the credit rating, especially right after the recession, if they didn't qualify for their child's student loans because those loans get attributed to the parents and the parents are expected to pay them back, or they won't fill out the paperwork because they don't want to get stuck with that bill, our kids don't have the money to go to school. So we are literally wasting the minds of our young people. And so a lot of our really intelligent high school graduates either become unemployed or underemployed because they never had the actual opportunity to go to school. And that's another thing that people are not aware of.
Well, guys, this was great. I want to thank the panel for their time here today. Give them a round of applause. You know, just based on some of the comments and the answers that they've given, we have a lot of work to do still. But this is the place where it begins, right here. We are an educational institution, and this is our charge to make sure that we deliver these things to you. So we can have these conversations together by not talking at you, but talking with you.
Greg, can
So-
I ask a question?
Sure.
To the young man who had the questions, what's your major?
I'm just doing sociology and psychology.
Have you thought about teaching those at a high school level?
I mean, I'm just seeing if I like the school. I didn't go to college because I've heard like it's just a nightmare of like political mess and all that, and then it's like the teaching's not that good, and then class is dead, and I didn't want to do it, so it's like not doing it, not trying it. So.
Well, I mean, just from the comments and the questions you had, it sounds like you might have a passion for education, and I'm thinking, wow, maybe you should come on board and we should, because honestly, it takes good people who have the passion for it to fight the good fight. And we are fighting every single day for you guys and for the K-12 kids.
I'm considering.
Come see me, we'll talk.
If you're teaching social science, you need to coach if you want to do K-12, so.
That's not true. I taught social studies and I did not coach. There's a few districts you don't have to do that, but in Missouri, it's kind of an unwritten rule for most high schools. Yep, you have. So
Sports.
it's an unwritten rule in K-12 if you're going to teach high school social studies or social sciences that they want you to be a coach, an athletic coach. That is going by the wayside. I will tell you that is going. And even when I started teaching way back with the dinosaurs, there were districts that didn't require that, but it's kind of a myth. You'll hear that.
Okay, guys, great. We made that connection. So without further ado, you guys are expurgated and have a great day. And thank you for coming to the panel. We do appreciate it. Have a
And
great day.
before you go, thank you so much, panel. Before you go, the League of Women Voters is gone for the day. I don't know if they're going to be in Iraq tomorrow, but you can still register to vote if you have not. On the centerfold, page 5, whatever this is, the centerfold of your
Right now,
Democracy Days panel, there's an address. You can register to vote